I remembered the floodgate before I remembered this body. One moment, I was 34. An emergency engineer, forcing open a jammed spillway, while a flooded service tunnel came apart around me. The next morning, I woke in a 20-year-old stranger's body. I stood beneath a crystal sphere in a royal hall and somehow understood every word around me. The system called me Kai Ver. That was this body's name too. Then it gave me a class. Keeper of the Withered Seed. Rank F. The hall laughed while I stared at the name. I knew this kingdom from a strategy game on Earth. And the territory the Crown Prince offered me next was the one region players could never enter. The Black Mire had poisoned water, missing expeditions, and no functioning settlement. The charter gave me 100 days to make it livable or lose everything. I had no army, no money worth mentioning, and one black seed that had done absolutely nothing since it appeared in my hand. Then the prince said, "Black Mire." The seed turned warm. That was the first useful thing that had happened since I died. I signed the charter before he could change his mind. Kai Ver set the quill back into the silver holder and watched the black ink spread through his new signature. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the parchment flashed with pale blue light. Frontier Charter accepted. Territory assigned. Black Mire. Settlement period, 100 days. Failure conditions, abandonment of claim, loss of charter seat, default to Crown service obligation. Success conditions. Establish a permanent settlement, secure potable water, secure a renewable food source, restore one recognized frontier facility, retain territorial control until inspection. A smaller clause stated that the 100-day count would begin when the brass claim seal crossed the mapped frontier boundary, so travel from the capital would not consume settlement time. Kai read the conditions twice. Around him, laughter continued in smaller waves. Some of the candidates had already lost interest now that the joke had reached its ending. A young noble with bright green cuffs was explaining to his friends that the Black Mire ate horses. Someone else said, even frogs refused to live there. A third voice wondered how long an F-rank gardener would survive. Kai ignored them. The signature line was still warm under his fingers. At 34, in his former life, he had spent enough time in emergency coordination rooms to recognize the moment when ridicule was less dangerous than missing information. He raised his eyes toward the dais. Crown Prince Adrian Salvar sat beneath the royal standard, with one hand resting on the carved arm of his chair. He looked close to Kai's new age, perhaps 25, though the stillness in his pale blue eyes made him seem older. His hair was almost white gold and cut neatly above the collar of a navy and ivory uniform. He had not laughed once. That was what bothered Kai. When the crystal had announced Keeper of the Withered Seed, the prince had looked directly at the small black seed that appeared in Kai's inventory tray. The reaction lasted perhaps one heartbeat. His fingers had stopped moving. Then he had offered the Black Mire. Nobody else seemed to notice. Kai had. A clerk in gray robes approached and cleared his throat. He was a narrow man with a narrow mustache and the tired expression of someone who believed paperwork was the highest form of suffering. He informed Kai that his place at the dais was no longer required and that he should proceed to the Western Registry to collect his frontier packet. Kai asked whether the charter included a current survey map. The clerk blinked. Then he said it included the last approved survey. Kai asked when that survey had been conducted. The man checked a slate. 28 years ago. Kai looked at him. The clerk looked back. Kai asked whether any later survey existed. The clerk's mouth tightened. He said that if one existed, it was not attached to the charter. That answer was technically careful enough to be interesting. Kai thanked him and stepped away from the signing table. The polished marble floor reflected a stranger. The body he now inhabited was younger and leaner than the one he had died in. Around 20 years old, perhaps 21. Midnight blue hair fell untidily over his forehead, except for a single silver lock that ran from his left temple toward his brow. His eyes were amber, almost gold, under the hall lights. The face was sharper than his old one, with the irritating kind of symmetry that would have looked fashionable in an illustrated novel. He still felt like himself behind it, although the borrowed face made every reflection feel half a second wrong. The body's memories came in usable fragments. The original Kai had attended a provincial state school, lived in a dormitory with leaking windows, barely passed basic sword training, completed a civil examination, and awakened enough mana to qualify for the annual frontier selection. His parents had died years ago. He had no noble sponsor and no debt beyond the state education contract attached to the candidate program. The original Kai Ver had gone to sleep sick with fever the night before the ceremony. The man from Earth had opened his eyes in the same bed that morning. Whatever had happened between those two facts could wait. Water, food, shelter, security. Those could not wait. Kai left the Hall of Founders while the next candidate stepped toward the crystal. Painted settlers on the walls raised flags over green fields. The artists had skipped failed wells, infected cuts, bad drainage, and every other detail that usually decided whether a settlement survived. The blue class window still followed him. Keeper of the Withered Seed. Rank F. Active skills, none. Class item, Withered Seed. Description: a keeper preserves what others abandon. Focusing on the seed produced one more line. Condition unknown. Kai knew Edria because he had played Crown Frontier on Earth. He remembered its main kingdoms, political factions, territorial systems, and enough of the early campaign to recognize Crown Prince Adrian as a capable reformer whose later role changed with player choices. The Black Mire had never been playable. It sat behind a permanent gray veil in the southeastern corner of the map. Clicking it produced a single message: region inaccessible. Players had called it CUD content. Kai now had a legal deed to it. The Western Registry replaced marble with stone counters and exhausted clerks. The man assigned to Kai's charter read Black Mire with the tone of a physician confirming a terminal diagnosis. He handed over the 28-year-old survey, a portable brass claim seal, a small pouch of silver, a travel voucher, a supply allowance, and 74 clauses of frontier law. Clause 9 was the useful one. A landholder without a household retinue could request 3 state-assigned specialists. The pool included convicts, disciplinary cases, debt wards, and failed licensed professionals. If the settlement passed its 100-day inspection, eligible assignees could convert their sentences into frontier citizenship. If it failed, survivors returned to state custody. Most claimants chose guards. Kai requested the professional registry. 3 ordinary swords would make 4 people slightly harder to kill. 3 specialists might let them solve the reason they were dying. Kai scanned 62 entries by profession and stopped on 3. Liara Fen was a licensed toxin healer whose extraction magic could pull poison, disease residue, and corrupted mana from living tissue or plants. Her medical negligence conviction blamed her for spreading contamination through a field clinic, while the details of the incident were sealed. Mara Voss was a former frontier infantry sergeant with commendations, a battle curse, and a detention record from Fort Neril, where she had injured 3 fellow soldiers after the fighting ended. Selen's file was stranger. Mana capacity unusually high. Control rating poor. Repeated involuntary discharge. 3 damaged academy laboratories, 1 collapsed practice wall, and 1 professor's carriage embedded in a fountain. The clerk confirmed the carriage had been empty and refused to speculate about the rest. Her specialty was mana transfer and field channeling. Liara could handle contamination, Mara could defend the group, and Selen could supply controlled energy if they found a way to make the word controlled apply to her. Kai tapped all 3 names. The clerk's eyebrows rose. He told Kai that Mara Voss had been rejected by 5 claimants that morning. Kai said that meant she was available. He was warned that Liara's license remained restricted. Kai pointed out that the charter gave frontier holders emergency authority over medical practice inside unserved regions. The clerk went silent for a moment, then asked if Kai had memorized the regulations already. Kai said he had read the relevant page. The clerk told him he was beginning to understand why the Black Mire might be safer than the registry. Selen's name required a second approval. That was the first thing that bothered him. The clerk sent a runner to a supervisor. The supervisor arrived, examined Selen's entry, then disappeared through another door. 10 minutes passed. A different official returned with the approval already sealed in royal blue wax. The man was dressed too well for routine registry work. He looked at Kai, then at the line with Selen's name. For one small moment, his expression tightened. He told the clerk the transfer was authorized. Kai asked whether there were special conditions attached to her assignment. The official said there were none beyond the standard charter. Then he left. Kai watched him go. The clerk had also noticed and became very interested in stacking blank forms. Kai saved the question for later. He signed the 3 assignment requests. The holding annex stood behind the registry courtyard. Kai expected cells. Instead, he found something closer to a miserable employment office guarded by soldiers. The people there wore gray state coats, marked with different colored tabs indicating sentence categories. Liara Fen was seated beside a narrow window, reading an herbal ledger with half its pages missing. Her appearance made her impossible to mistake for anyone else. Long sea green hair had been braided tightly down her back, and loose strands framed a pale face dusted with freckles across the nose. Her eyes were yellow-green, sharp and tired. She wore a faded creamed healer's coat over the gray state uniform, with the old medical insignia carefully removed from the collar. When Kai's escort called her name, she closed the book with one finger, marking her place. Her first question was which territory had requested her. Kai told her. Liara looked at the guard, then back at Kai. She asked whether this was some kind of additional sentence. Kai said he had been wondering the same thing. One corner of her mouth moved despite herself. Mara Voss came from the training yard. She was taller than Kai by several centimeters and built like someone who had spent years carrying armor, because asking someone else to carry it would take too long. Her hair was deep crimson and cut unevenly at the jaw. Bronze eyes examined Kai once, from boots to silver streak, and dismissed him with professional efficiency. Dark red marks curled from beneath the sleeves of her state shirt and crossed the backs of her hands like old burns drawn in ink. Those were probably the curse. She asked his combat class. Kai told her F-rank territorial support. Mara looked toward the guard. She asked if refusal was still an option. The guard said yes. Mara asked where the next assignment might send her. The guard listed 3 possibilities: a quarry, a northern road gang, or 6 more months in detention while the military reviewed her case. Mara looked at Kai again. She said the swamp had improved considerably. Once her transfer was accepted, the annex quartermaster returned the registered service sword that had been held with her military property. Mara checked the edge, belted it on, and only then seemed willing to believe the assignment was real. Selen arrived last. The guard who accompanied her was a captain, not an ordinary annex soldier. Kai noticed that immediately. Selen herself seemed determined to pretend the distinction did not exist. Her hair was pale lavender, so light it looked silver where the courtyard sun struck it. It reached almost to her waist and had been tied with a plain black ribbon. Her eyes were a deep violet. Unlike Liara's healer coat or Mara's military posture, Selen still carried traces of courtly education in every movement. She stood too straight. She acknowledged the captain with exactly the correct degree of formality. Even the way she accepted the transfer paper suggested someone who had spent years being corrected on how to receive documents. Her gray state coat had one sleeve patched at the elbow. There were no visible shackles. The captain handed Kai the transfer seal personally. He said Selen's mana instability could be hazardous and that she should not be allowed to channel through royal devices without supervision. Kai asked whether that warning was standard for expelled academy channelers. The captain held his gaze for half a second too long. He said it was now. Then he left. Mara watched him cross the courtyard. She asked Selen what she had done to deserve a captain. Selen replied that technically the fountain had deserved it more. Liara closed her eyes. Kai found himself liking the answer more than he should have. They were given a small consultation room because frontier assignments required consent before departure. The state did not permit a claimant to drag unwilling assignees into a lethal region. The law was less generous than it sounded. Refusing one assignment usually meant waiting for whatever worse assignment came next. Kai put the charter on the table. He did not promise them safety. He did not tell them they were chosen because he believed in them. Instead, he explained the situation as he understood it. The Black Mire was contaminated. Existing surveys were almost 3 decades out of date. The charter required potable water, renewable food, 1 restored frontier facility, and control of the claim for 100 days. Their starting allowance was small. If the territory failed, all 4 of them would lose something. If it succeeded, Liara, Mara, and Selen would become eligible for frontier citizenship and the clearing of their current state sentences. Mara asked how many soldiers he had. Kai said 1, if she agreed. She stared at him. 1 trained soldier, and 1 man who had once passed basic sword instruction by convincing the examiner not to ask for a second demonstration. Selen's lips twitched. Liara asked whether he had any idea what contamination existed in the mire. Kai admitted he did not. That answer made her study him more carefully. Many people who knew nothing about medicine, she said, preferred to begin by giving medical instructions. Kai told her that if she came, water and toxin decisions would be hers, unless immediate survival required otherwise. Mara asked who would make defense decisions. Kai said she would advise them, and he would make settlement-level decisions when risks affected everyone. Mara asked what happened if he gave a stupid order. Kai said he expected her to tell him before carrying it out. She asked what happened if there was no time. Kai said then she should use the judgment that had earned her commendations before Fort Narrow. Mara's thumb pressed hard against the edge of the paper. The movement lasted a second, but Kai saw it before she relaxed her hand. He had read the entire file, not just the final charge, and now he knew the name still reached her. He did not press further. Selen asked what he expected from her. Kai said controlled mana in small amounts, if she could manage it. She gave him a look that suggested he had just asked a thunderstorm to become a desk lamp. Kai added that he was not asking for large spells. That seemed to make the request worse. Selen told him her main problem was that mana did not like remaining where she put it. Kai asked whether it leaked continuously or only under strain. Continuously, she said. Strong emotion and active casting made it worse. He asked whether the leakage could be measured. Selen paused. Nobody had phrased the problem that way before. Eventually she said, yes, in theory. Kai nodded. A leak was still a flow. A flow could sometimes be redirected. Selen looked at him for several seconds. Mara asked whether he planned to conquer the swamp with plumbing. Kai said he had not ruled it out. Liara laughed first. It was quiet and brief, as though the sound had surprised her. The consent forms remained on the table. Liara signed first. She did not say she trusted Kai. She said a toxic frontier was at least a place where her skill had obvious value. Mara signed second, after rereading the sentence conversion clause herself. She told Kai that if he got them killed for pride, she intended to haunt him in a very organized manner. Kai said organization would be appreciated. Selen picked up the pen last. Her hand hovered over the line. For a fraction of a second, her gaze shifted toward the closed door through which the captain had left. Then, she signed. Kai noticed that too. By late afternoon, the 4 of them stood in the supply yard, with everything the Crown considered sufficient to begin a settlement. It fit on 1 2-wheeled cart. 5 days of dry rations for 4 adults, 2 canvas shelters, 1 coil of heavy rope and 2 smaller coils, a box of nails, 3 hatchets, 1 wood saw, a shovel, a mattock, a small iron cooking pot, 4 bedrolls, lamp oil, flint, a basic first aid chest with salt packets and glucose powder for dehydration treatment, 4 water flasks, a sack of hardy grain seed, a smaller sack of root vegetable seed, 2 fishing lines, a bundle of cheap spears, 1 old crossbow with 20 bolts, a hand cart repair kit with a sturdy utility knife, a survey compass, a small packet of dried onion in the ration box, 1 brass boundary claim marker, separate from the portable claim seal already locked in Kai's document case. Kai counted everything twice. Mara leaned against the cart while he measured the rope by arm lengths. She asked if he planned to defeat the Black Mire through accounting. Kai checked the nail box. He said if they ran out of food, she was welcome to stab hunger and report the result. Selin turned away to hide a smile. Mara said she would stab him first because he seemed more edible than hunger. Liara, examining the medical chest, said she recommended against it. He looked stringy. Kai closed the nail box. Their first meeting as a team was going better than expected. The travel voucher provided a mule and driver as far as the final Crown Road station. Beyond that, the route entered abandoned frontierland, and the driver was not required to continue. They left the capital before sunset. The travel voucher covered simple meals at Crown Road stations, so Kai kept the frontier ration box sealed, except for one emergency meal. He spent most of the ride over the survey. The Black Mire filled a low basin between two old river branches. The map showed raised causeways, a western watchpost, two oversized drainage canals, and an eastern pumping station crossed out in red with no explanation. Greymouth, a village on the northern edge, carried a newer tax note for arrears and suspended fishing permits. Even the contour lines looked wrong, sinking in a broad ring around the center of the basin. Liara noticed the canal width too. A territory with no farms had once received infrastructure sized for a major reclamation project. When she asked how Kai read surveys so easily, he said he had worked around flood control and emergency repairs before coming to the capital. The answer borrowed from his old life more than this body's memories, but it was broad enough to survive a roadside conversation. Mara asked whether abandoned infrastructure counted as good news. Kai said useful ruins were good news until someone discovered why they had become ruins. Silin's shoulders tightened at the words abandoned royal works. Kai added the reaction to the other small inconsistencies surrounding her, and kept reading. The second road station had already heard their destination. A stable boy refused to bet on how many days they would last, because wagering required uncertainty. Mara asked whether he wanted to test that confidence with money. The boy considered her red hair, the curse marks on her hands, and the sword at her hip. He suddenly discovered uncertainty. They slept in a storage loft and left before dawn. On the second day of travel, the cultivated land thinned. Wheat became rough pasture. Pasture became wet grass. The road rose onto an old embankment of stone and packed earth. Birdsong changed first. Then, the smell. Sweet rot, wet mineral earth, sulfur somewhere underneath. Shortly after noon, a dark green line filled the horizon. The Black Mire. The driver stopped at the final crown marker, with most of the afternoon still ahead. He did not need to be asked twice. The mule was unloaded. Their supplies were transferred to the handcart. The driver signed Kai's receipt with great enthusiasm, wished them luck, then turned the mule around so quickly that one wheel clipped the road marker. Mara watched him disappear. She said his confidence in their mission was inspiring. Kai looked east. The last maintained road ended at a cracked stone dike. Beyond it, dark water reflected the white afternoon sky. Reeds rose higher than a man's shoulders. Gnarled trees stood on islands of black mud, their roots twisted like exposed fingers. Mist drifted in thin layers above the water. Somewhere far inside the wetland, something gave a long, throaty call. A second sound answered from another direction. Selin looked at the handcart, then at the swamp. She asked whether anyone had checked if the cart floated. Kai considered spending the night on the crown side of the marker. The ground was safer there, and the 100-day count had not begun. Then he checked the sky, the distance to the western watchpost, and the remaining daylight. They had more than 6 hours before dark. Entering now would let them test the first pools, reach the mapped post, and retreat while they could still see the causeway if the site proved unusable. Waiting until morning would buy comfort, not information. He told the others the plan and one hard limit. If they had not found defensible dry ground by late afternoon, they would turn back to the road marker before dusk. He lifted the portable brass claim seal from his document case and stepped past the fixed boundary marker. Pale blue letters appeared at once. Charter day count activated. Day 1 of 100. The black seed in his class inventory warmed hard enough that he felt it through his palm even before he summoned it. A second line flickered and vanished. Compatible environmental trace detected. The notice gave him neither direction nor explanation, but it confirmed that the reaction in the royal hall had not been imagination. Mara looked at the rope in Kai's hand and groaned. He had apparently decided to begin conquering the swamp with accounting and rope. The first 100 meters took nearly an hour. The old causeway still existed, but years of floodwater had eaten through its edges. Grass hid gaps deep enough to snap an ankle. The handcart had to be unloaded twice and lifted across washed-out sections. Kai stopped them after Mara's boot sank to the calf beside what looked like solid ground. She pulled free with a wet sucking sound and stared at the mud clinging to her trousers. Selin observed that the Black Mire had officially claimed its first military victory. Mara told her the next carriage Selin launched into a fountain should contain a mage. Liara crouched near the edge of the causeway and pushed a glass testing rod into the water. The clear liquid inside the rod turned cloudy violet. She frowned. Kai asked for the short version. Liara said the water contained ordinary biological contamination, mineral salts, and some kind of low-level mana toxin she could not identify without better tools. Kai asked whether boiling would make it safe. Liara said boiling would handle some biological risk but leave the mana toxin. Cloth would remove visible debris. Charcoal might reduce part of the physical contamination. None of those methods would solve the magical component by itself. Mara looked across several thousand square kilometers of water and said that was inconvenient. Kai checked their flasks. 4 people would empty the remaining clean water in less than a day and a half, even under strict rationing. And the heat was already pushing their needs higher. He adjusted the day's objective immediately. They would not search for an ideal settlement site. They would search for any defensible dry ground close enough to the old causeway to retreat if necessary. The survey marked a western watchpost only a few hundred meters inside the claim. If it still existed, that was their best chance. They moved more carefully. Kai took the lead only where the causeway remained obvious. In flooded sections, he let Mara probe with a spear, and Liara examine water plants for signs of deep channels. Selin kept her mana contained and used no spells. The first creature they encountered was a hand-sized blue crab sitting on a broken paving stone. It raised both claws when Mara approached. Mara stopped. The crab did not retreat. Selin asked if this was the legendary monster that had destroyed the previous expeditions. The crab pinched the leather edge of her boot. She looked down. Then she flicked it into the reeds with one finger. Kai told Selin to record the victory for the military archives. Mara said she hated both of them. The humor faded when they found the first animal skeleton. It had once been a deer or something similar. Most of the bones lay half submerged in green water. Black stains spread through the ribs as if ink had grown inside them. Liara put on gloves before touching anything. She scraped a sample into a small vial from the medical kit. The contamination had entered the bone itself. She told them not to touch any dead creature barehanded until she understood what they were dealing with. Another 100 meters east, the reeds opened around a patch of raised stone. The watchpost still existed, although one wall had collapsed. The roof was gone from half the building. A square tower leaned several degrees toward the water. Vines covered the old royal crest above the doorway. But the foundation stood on a mound of packed stone and earth roughly 40 meters across. Kai felt an embarrassing amount of relief at the sight of dirt that did not move under his boots. They searched the ruins before unloading anything. Mara went first, with sword drawn. Kai followed with the crossbow, because he was the second least likely person to accidentally destroy the building. Liara waited at the entrance. Selin remained outside, where an uncontrolled spell had space to escape. The ground floor contained 2 rooms, a broken table, old shelving, and a rusted stove. The upper floor was too unstable to use. The rear wall had a stone-lined drainage ditch leading downslope toward the swamp. The rooms held no bodies or active nests, and Mara found no fresh tracks larger than a bird. Mara gave the place her approval, with the enthusiasm of someone raiding a prison cell. Kai walked the perimeter. The mound had 3 important features. First, the center sat nearly 2 meters above the surrounding water. Second, the old drainage ditch still carried rainwater away from the foundation. Third, black bubbles rose from a muddy depression on the southern side whenever he pushed a stick into it. He marked the spot and postponed any fire test until the camp was unloaded and everyone could stand well clear. They unloaded the handcart inside the surviving room. Kai assigned areas before anyone chose a bedroll. Food went on the driest shelf. Medical supplies stayed in Liara's control. Fuel and lamp oil were separated. 1 canvas shelter covered the damaged roof. The second remained packed as reserve. Then Kai carried the shovel to the leeward edge of the mound, still well above the visible floodline. Mara followed him and asked what he was doing. He checked the drainage ditch, the nearest surface water, the prevailing wind, and the depth at which damp soil began. The ground was too saturated for a deep pit. He marked a shallow trench on compacted clay instead, and planned to line it. Cover each use with ash and dry soil, and close it before any future root network reached that side of the mound. Kai said they were building a latrine. Mara stared at him. They had crossed a poisoned swamp. There were unknown monsters in the reeds. Their drinking water was limited. Their shelter had half a roof. His first construction order was sanitation. Kai explained that a deep pit here could leak straight into the wet ground, so they were building the safest temporary version the site allowed. A monster might kill 1 or 2 people if it reached camp. Contaminated drinking water could remove the whole group while the monsters watched. Mara folded her arms and informed him that if she died tonight while building a toilet, she intended to become exactly the organized ghost she had promised. Kai handed her the mattock. He kept the only shovel. He said an organized ghost should appreciate proper drainage. From the doorway, Liara laughed so hard she had to brace one hand against the stone. Selin sat on the remaining wall and announced that she had changed her opinion. The mission was clearly doomed, but at least it would be hygienic. They cut the shallow trench, tamped a clay lining into it, and set aside stove ash for cover. Afterward, Kai marked a clean zone around food and sleeping space, a tool area, and a contaminated sample area on the far side of the ruin. Liara approved the arrangement, then immediately moved his boots out of the clean zone because he had stepped in suspect mud. That seemed to surprise her. By late afternoon, they had a camp that was primitive but organized. Water remained the problem. Liara tested 3 nearby pools. All contained the same unknown mana toxin at slightly different concentrations. She found one reed whose inner fibers did not absorb much of the contamination. It might work as part of a physical filter, but she warned that filtering visible dirt would only make dangerous water look trustworthy. Kai agreed. He had seen that mistake after floods. They rationed the remaining clean water. Mara objected to Kai giving everyone equal shares after he had spent more time working in the sun. Kai said leadership did not reduce his kidney's need for caution. She asked whether that was an official engineering principle. He said it was now. Near sunset, Kai returned to the southern depression. The bubbles still rose from the mud. He filled a small clay cup from the supply kit with gas by inverting it over the bubbling water, then carried it several meters away. Everyone else stood farther back. He held a burning twig near the rim. The trapped gas ignited with a soft blue flare, methane or something close enough in behavior to matter. Mara looked at the swamp. She asked whether the ground was full of fire. Kai said pockets of decaying material could produce flammable gas. The cup had burned only at the rim, which suggested the sample was not behaving like an explosive mixture. But one cup told him almost nothing about the volume trapped under the mound. Magic could change the chemistry as well. Nobody would light open flames near bubbling depressions unless he or Selin checked first. Selin pointed out that he had just appointed the woman with unstable magic as a fire inspector. Kai said that gave her unusually strong motivation to care about procedure. She accepted the logic with visible offense. The sun dropped. Mist thickened above the water. They ate dry biscuits softened in a little hot water and strips of salted meat. Liara added a handful of leaves she had identified as safe. They tasted like wet paper. Mara chewed one for a long time and said the Black Mire had finally found a way to make prison food seem ambitious. Darkness arrived quickly. The old watchpost had once used a signal lantern mounted above the door. The glass was broken, but the metal housing remained. Kai cleaned the contacts out of habit, even though he had no idea how a magical light worked. Selin watched him. She said the lantern used a simple charge stone. The stone was missing. Kai asked if she could power it directly. Selin looked at the rusted device, then at him. She could, but her definition of directly was usually followed by repair bills. Kai asked how little mana the lamp required. Almost none. He asked whether she could feed it less than she thought it needed. Selin gave him a flat look. That was not how mana felt from the inside, she explained. Holding back was like trying to pour one spoonful from a bucket while someone shook her arm. Kai considered the image. Could she spill the extra somewhere else? She paused. Into what? Grounding rod? Water? Metal mass? Anything that accepted mana without reacting violently. Selin looked toward the old iron stove. Liara immediately objected to using the cooking equipment as an experimental magical sink. They compromised on a rusted section of railing outside. Selin connected one hand to the lantern housing and the other to the railing. Her violet eyes narrowed. A pulse of pale light ran along her fingers. The lantern exploded into brilliant white light. The railing gave a loud metallic hum. Everyone ducked. Then, the light dropped to a steady warm glow. Selin opened one eye. The lamp was still intact. Kai said that counted as progress. Liara inspected the stove, as if making sure it had not become involved against its will. Mara said the lamp was now visible from the capital. Selin told her to appreciate successful engineering. Kai almost corrected the term, then decided to accept the compliment on behalf of the railing. They established a watch rotation. Mara took first watch because she could function on less sleep for one night. Liara third. Selin last when dawn reduced the need for her to cast, if something moved. Kai slept for perhaps 40 minutes. Then Mara's hand closed over his shoulder. He woke before she spoke. Her face was turned toward the reeds. The lantern light reached only to the edge of the mound. Beyond it, 2 points reflected yellow. Then another pair appeared farther left. A low growl rolled through the mist. Mara whispered that there were at least 4. Kai reached for the crossbow. Liara was already awake. Selin sat up, hair loose around her shoulders, one hand glowing faintly with gathering mana. Kai told her not to cast yet. She looked annoyed, but released the charge. Something moved in the reeds. A creature stepped into the edge of the lantern light. It resembled a wolf only in the general arrangement of legs, teeth, and bad intentions. Its body was long and low, with patchy black fur slicked against gray-green skin. Thin plates covered its shoulders. The eyes reflected gold. Saliva hung from its jaws in strings that hissed when they touched wet stone. She told them the saliva was toxic. Mara drew her sword. Another hound appeared to the right. A third moved behind the collapsed wall. Kai counted shadows rather than animals, and reached 5, possibly 6. They were testing the perimeter. The old causeway from the west. A narrow strip of firm ground on the north side. The southern slope near the gas depression. The eastern side dropped directly into water. Kai pointed Mara toward the northern approach because it was the narrowest. Liara stayed inside the doorway with the medical chest. Selin remained near the lantern and would only cast on command. Kai took the crossbow near the west wall. Mara asked why he was not putting her on the causeway. Kai said because if the animals were intelligent enough to circle, they would test the smallest opening first. The first hound charged exactly there. Mara stepped forward once. Her sword struck the creature across the snout and turned its bite aside. It twisted with unnerving speed, claws scraping stone, and lunged again at her thigh. Mara drove her knee into its chest, shoved it back, and cut down through the shoulder. The animal screamed. A second shape came from the reeds before the first hit the ground. Kai fired. The bolt struck the second hound behind the foreleg, but did not stop it. Mara kicked the wounded first animal into its path. Both tumbled off the firm ground into shallow water. A third hound came over the broken west wall instead of using the causeway. It had climbed through the collapsed stones while they watched the obvious approaches. Selin turned. Mana flashed around her hand. Kai saw the southern bubbles trembling in the same instant. He shouted for her to stop. Selin clenched her fist hard enough that light leaked between her fingers. The hound jumped. Kai swung the unloaded crossbow like a club. The wooden stock hit the creature's jaw. Pain shot through both his arms. The hound landed against him instead of on him, and the impact drove him into the wall. Its teeth snapped inches from his face. The smell of its saliva was bitter and metallic. Kai jammed the crossbow sideways between its jaws. The wood cracked. Selin grabbed the old lantern housing with one hand. She poured mana into it. White light burst across the courtyard. The hound flinched. That half-second was enough. Kai shoved it away and rolled toward the doorway. Liara threw a small ceramic vial. It shattered against the stones beside the animal. Sharp herbal smoke burst upward. The hound recoiled, sneezing and shaking its head. He drove a spear point into the creature's side as it turned. The weapon penetrated only a few inches before striking one of the dark plates beneath his fur. The hound snapped the shaft with a twist. Mara shouted from the north side. Two more had entered the fight. One was dead, and another wounded. Kai counted 3 active shapes. Then a fourth emerged from the mist on the western causeway. The 6th hound stood almost shoulder-high to him, with scars across its muzzle and one ear missing. It had waited while the smaller animals tested the camp. The pack leader had finally entered the fight, and Mara saw it at the same moment. She started toward the causeway. A smaller hound lunged after her. Mara pivoted and cut upward. Her blade opened the animal from chest to jaw. The red markings on her forearms brightened. Her next movement was faster. Too fast. She chased the remaining northern hound down the slope into the reeds. Kai shouted her name. She did not answer. The pack leader advanced. This was changing. The animals had learned that Selin's light hurt their eyes. They were staying outside the brightest circle and attacking from opposite sides. One hound worried Mara. Another kept Kai and Liara near the doorway. The leader approached along the causeway where the ground was safest. Kai looked south. Gas depression, old drainage ditch, iron grate half buried near the ruined stove outlet. Earlier, while inspecting the post, he had noticed the ditch continued under a collapsed section of wall and ended near the southern slope. The bubbles rose beside it. Gas had probably collected inside the old drain, but he still did not know how much or how evenly it mixed with air. He could use the vent as a barrier only if everyone was already clear when it lit. He grabbed the lamp oil and one of the thin utility cords from the supply bundle. Liara saw him and immediately asked what he was doing. He told Selin to take the lantern east, away from the southern depression. She understood the risk at once and retreated toward the waterside. Kai soaked a short length of cord with lamp oil and laid it along the stone toward the open drain mouth, keeping most of the wick outside the suspected gas pocket. It was crude. It would give him a few seconds between ignition and whatever happened at the vent, which was better than striking a spark directly over it. The pack leader broke into a run. The leader hit the edge of the ruin. Kai stepped back. Liara moved behind him with a short spear. The hound lunged. Kai dodged badly. A claw ripped his coat and opened a shallow cut along his ribs. Pain arrived hot and immediate. He stumbled into the wall. Liara drove her spear at the hound's face. It twisted away, faster than she expected, and the shaft grazed its neck. The creature turned on her. Mara crashed into it from the side. She had returned from the reeds with blood on her blade and too much brightness in her bronze eyes. The impact knocked the leader across the causeway. Mara followed. Kai shouted for her to stop. She did not. The curse marks on her arms glowed dark red. The hound baited her backward. It retreated 2 steps, snapped at her sword, then moved another 2 toward the center of the causeway. a smaller hound appeared behind Mara. The pack was trying to trap her. Kai saw the shape of the fight. He also saw the old iron grate beside his boot. The grate covered the mouth of the drainage channel. He hooked the mattock through it and pulled. Rust resisted. The smaller hound jumped at Mara's back. Selin raised one hand. Kai shouted for a push, not fire. She understood. A burst of raw force hit the animal in midair. Because Selin could not moderate anything, the hound flew sideways through a rotten section of wall and disappeared in a shower of stone. The same burst sent the lantern swinging wildly in her other hand. She swore and caught it against her chest. Kai pulled the grate again. It shifted. Black water gurgled under the opening. Gas hissed out with it. He could smell the change. The hiss confirmed that the drainage channel held trapped gas. That gave Kai the barrier he wanted, and enough uncertainty to make the plan dangerous. He shouted for everyone to move east. Mara did not move. The pack leader had turned again. She met it blade to teeth near the oil line. Kai ran toward her. Liara caught his sleeve and pointed. The smaller hound Selin had thrown through the wall, was climbing back out. Kai grabbed the remaining half-spear and thrust it toward the animal. It snapped at the point. He used the shaft to keep distance while backing toward the gas channel. The hound pressed him. This one had learned from the earlier spear attack. Each time he aimed for its body, it turned the plated shoulder toward the point. Kai changed target and jabbed low. The spear struck the front paw. The hound yelped and shifted weight. He kicked a loose stone into its face, gained 1 second, and ran. Mara and the leader crossed the oil line. Kai shouted her name again and got no response. He changed the order and shouted, "Fort Neril." Mara froze. The name struck through the curse where command had failed. Her head turned toward him. For one instant, recognition cut through Mara's rage. Kai pointed east and shouted for her to fall back. She moved. The pack leader lunged after her. Kai struck flint against the oil-soaked cord. The dry outer fibers caught. Flame crawled toward the drain instead of racing cleanly. And for one ugly second, Kai thought the whetstone had ruined the plan. A deep whump rolled under the ruin. Blue flame punched from the drainage mouth and spread in a low sheet along the western approach. The pressure was stronger than Kai had hoped. Dust fell from the cracked wall, and one loose stone jumped in its mortar. He ducked behind the surviving corner with Liara. The pack leader landed on the far side of the sudden flame and recoiled. A smaller hound behind it twisted away too late, scorched one foreleg, and tumbled into the water. The flare lasted only a few seconds. By the time the blue fire collapsed, everyone Kai had ordered east was still east. That was the part of the gamble he had actually controlled. The leader stood 20 meters away, alive, ears flat, and muzzle wrinkled around its teeth. It had tested the camp, lured where the bright light came from, watched Mara's movements, and survived the most dangerous surprise they could produce on the first night. After several seconds, it turned and slipped into the reeds. Kai kept his eyes on the place where it vanished. Mara asked if they should pursue. Her voice was rough. The curse marks still glowed. Kai said no. Mara took one step anyway. Kai moved into her path. She was stronger than him. At that moment, probably several times stronger. He did not reach for a weapon. He told her the threat was leaving, and the camp was secure enough to regroup. Mara's grip tightened on her sword. She looked past him into the reeds. For a moment, Kai wondered whether the curse would make the decision for her. Then, Liara said Mara's name quietly from behind him. Mara's eyes shifted. The red marks dimmed. She exhaled through her nose and lowered the blade. The fight was over. Nobody cheered. Kai's ribs hurt. The cut along his side had bled through his shirt. Mara had 3 scratches on her left shoulder and 1 puncture in her forearm, where a tooth had grazed through cloth. Selin's hands trembled from holding back a larger spell. Liara had a shallow boat mark on the heel of one boot, and was furious about the damage to the leather. The camp smelled of smoke, blood, wet stone, and burnt gas. Liara made Kai sit. She examined his cut, declared it free of visible saliva, cleaned it, and wrapped his ribs. Then she turned to Mara. Mara said the arm was fine. Liara told her that was not a medical measurement. The puncture had been shallow, but the skin around it was already numbing. Liara placed 2 fingers above the wound. A faint green, gold glow spread through her hand. Dark fluid gathered beneath Mara's skin, like ink being pulled toward a magnet. Mara's jaw tightened. Liara drew the toxin out through the wound, into a small glass cup. The liquid hissed against the glass. When she finished, Mara flexed her fingers. Feeling had returned. Liara told her the poison was reduced, not erased. The wound still needed cleaning and rest. Mara asked if she could rest after sunrise. Liara said she could rest immediately, or become an educational example. Kai watched Liara seal the cup. Her ability was powerful, but the file had been accurate. The poison now existed outside Mara's body. Liara had not destroyed it. She carried the sealed cup to the contaminated sample area and buried it inside a second container of ash and clay. Kai asked what would happen if the glass broke. Liara said they would learn whether the soil could become more poisonous. He decided they needed better hazardous storage as soon as possible. Selin sat against the wall, still holding the lantern. The light had become steady again. Kai thanked her for changing the spell when he called for a push. She said she had nearly pushed the wall into him as well. Kai said nearly was doing useful work in that sentence. Selin looked at the damaged stones where the hound had landed. Then she laughed once, tiredly. Mara heard it and accused both of them of being far too pleased with surviving. Kai said he would schedule regret for morning. That finally earned a tired snort from Mara. They spent the next hour dragging dead hounds away from the clean area with ropes. Nobody touched the bodies directly. Liara collected samples from one. Kai repaired what he could of the western approach, using the surviving grate and broken timber. Only when the lantern was dimmed and the watch reset did they sit inside the ruin. Mara did not lie down. She stared at the sword across her knees. Kai sat opposite her. He asked whether Fort Merrill had been the place where the curse first took control. Mara's eyes lifted. She wanted to know how much the file said. Kai told her the file gave him the timing and injuries, while the reason the curse had taken control was sealed. Mara was quiet for a while. Then, she explained in short, practical pieces. The curse came from a red crystal burst during a border fight 2 years earlier. At first, it seemed useful. Pain became distant. Strength rose. Reactions sharpened. During long engagements, though, the effect accumulated. Anger became easier than judgment. Movement became easier than stopping. At Fort Neril, the enemy had retreated. One of Mara's own soldiers grabbed her shoulder from behind. She broke his arm before recognizing him. 2 others tried to restrain her. She put both in the infirmary. Kai asked why the fort's name had reached her tonight, when his orders had not. Mara rubbed her thumb across one dark mark on her wrist. The name brought back the crack of her friend's arm, the medic shouting inches from her face, and the horrible resistance in her own fingers when she tried to open them. Kai understood why the word had bought him 1 second. He also understood that using the worst memory of her life as standard procedure would be cruel and unreliable. Mara asked what he intended to use instead next time. Kai said they would choose a stop signal while she was calm. If the curse rose past the point where normal orders reached her, the signal would mean the objective had changed from attack to withdrawal. Mara thought about it and chose the words cold iron, a phrase nobody in the mire was likely to shout by accident. Kai made Liara and Selin repeat it once. A second call would mean they were allowed to interfere physically. Liara could use a prepared sedative if there was time. Selin could shove Mara away from a target, even if Mara hated her for it later. Terrain and restraints would be the last layer. Mara said he really did want to solve everything like a failed bridge. Kai answered that bridges rarely became angry about being reinforced. Mara said that was because bridges had never met him. The exchange loosened the knot in the room enough for everyone to breathe. They were still 4 wary people with injuries, incomplete information, and one dangerous rule they had finally agreed on. Kai tried to sleep again. The withered seed rested in the class inventory at the edge of his vision. For the first time since entering the mire, its status had changed. Condition unknown was gone. A new line appeared. Compatible ground detected. Kai sat up. The window remained. Compatible ground detected. He focused on the line. A second prompt unfolded beneath it. Class item can be routed. Required conditions incomplete. Kai stared at the message until the letters blurred. He had been carrying the seed since the Hall of Founders. He had touched it on the road, inspected it at the watchpost, and tried planting it once in a cup of ordinary soil before leaving the capital. Nothing had happened. The black mire had changed something. He opened the class inventory and let the seed fall into his palm. It looked as unimpressive as before. Rough black shell, oval shape, a thin pale line across one side, like a crack that had healed. The moment it touched the air, warmth spread through his fingers. Selin woke first. Her eyes went directly to the seed. She asked whether it had always been glowing. Kai looked down. A thread of gold had appeared beneath the dark shell. Mara opened one eye from where she sat against the wall. She asked whether they needed to fight the seed too. Liara, still half asleep, told her to wait until it developed teeth. Kai stood. The class window showed no more information inside the ruin. When he walked toward the southern side of the mound, the warmth increased. When he moved toward the western causeway, it faded. He tested 4 directions. The seed was responding to location. Mara watched him pace around the camp and asked if this was part of the accounting strategy. Kai told her he was finding the point of strongest response. Selin pushed herself up and followed, curiosity winning over exhaustion. The strongest point lay near the center of the mound, just outside the ruined watchpost. That was useful. It was also suspiciously convenient. Kai knelt and pressed the seed against the ground. A new prompt appeared. Settlement route unavailable. Minimum resident bond. 4 adults. Current recognized residents. 1. Kai frowned. Mara loomed over his shoulder even though she could not see his personal interface. She asked what was wrong. He explained the requirement. Selin immediately understood the legal implication. Territory ownership and settlement recognition were separate system functions. A charter holder could own empty land, but a settlement required residents who voluntarily registered the location as home. Kai asked how she knew that. She answered too smoothly. Academy Civic Studies. Mara said the army called it making sure officers could not declare a barracks full of conscripts a private kingdom. Liara added that frontier clinics used the same resident bond to determine whether a camp qualified for state supply protections. That answered enough of the question. For now. Kai opened the settlement registration prompt and read the wording aloud. Registration did not make anyone his servant. It did not transfer property. It did not create permanent residency. It simply recognized the current site as their primary home for settlement system purposes, until they withdrew or registered elsewhere. Liara extended her hand first. She said she had slept there, been attacked there, and already buried poison there. It was apparently home enough for one night. Kai used the brass claim seal to activate the registration. A faint blue mark appeared over Liara's wrist, then vanished. Recognized residents? 2. Selin came next. She hesitated before touching the seal, not because of the settlement itself. Her eyes fixed on the royal crest engraved around the brass edge. The moment her finger made contact, a tiny spark jumped between skin and metal. She pulled back. Selin said static mana. Liara raised an eyebrow. Selin tried again with 2 fingers. This time, the seal accepted her. Recognized residents. 3. Mara remained standing. She asked one question. Home meant current home, not permanent oath. She could withdraw whenever she chose, though leaving the charter service would return her to military custody unless the sentence status changed. Mara stared at the little patch of dry ground around them. The roof leaked. One wall was missing. Poisoned water surrounded the mound. 3 dead hounds lay beyond the clean zone, waiting to be dealt with properly. She put her hand on the seal. If anyone called this a home in front of her old unit, she said, she would deny everything. The fourth bond formed. Settlement requirements met. Rooting available. Kai dug a hole with the small trowel from Liara's kit, because the shovel seemed absurdly large for one seed. The soil beneath the surface was dark, damp, and threaded with tiny pale roots from ordinary weeds. Liara examined it and warned that it carried the same low-level contamination as the water. Kai placed the black seed inside. Anyway, for one breath, nothing happened. Then the soil moved. A hair-thin golden root pushed through the seed shell. It touched the mud. The ground around Kai's hand warmed. More roots emerged, impossibly fast, but not violently. They spread through the topsoil in branching lines no thicker than thread. Wherever they passed, oily black moisture gathered into small beads and drew inward toward the seed. She told everyone not to touch the beads. The seed split. A pale stem rose through the soil, bent once under its own weight, then straightened. 2 leaves unfolded. Their veins glowed gold. Selen's face changed. For the first time since Kai met her, the careful court-trained composure disappeared completely. She whispered that she had never seen mana organize itself like that. The stem continued growing until it reached Kai's knee. Then his waist, then his chest. Mara stepped back and put one hand on her sword, out of habit. The tree stopped at a little over 2 meters tall. Its trunk was narrow enough for Kai to circle with both hands. The bark looked pale brown in daylight, but thin lines of gold moved underneath it, like slow blood vessels. Its leaves were dark green, with metallic gold along the edges. It was beautiful, and at a little over 2 meters, it was far smaller than the name Golden Tree suggested. Kai's class window changed. Withered seed restored to sapling state. Root radius, 18 meters. Purification function, active. Purification rate, limited by root mass, available mana, water access, and biomass. Storage capacity, minimal. No attack functions available. Kai read the limits twice. They gave him something he could plan around. Liara was already testing the soil. The dark beads drawn toward the roots did not disappear. They accumulated in tiny amber nodules beneath the bark, near ground level. She carefully scraped one with a metal probe. The nodule contained concentrated contamination. The tree was separating toxins, not erasing them. Kai crouched beside her. That distinction mattered. If the storage filled, he asked, what happened? Liara said she did not know, and she strongly suggested they not discover it by accident. The first real task of the Golden Tree became building a safe way to collect waste. Mara looked up at the glowing leaves. She said their legendary F-rank miracle had apparently become a very elegant filter. Kai said filters had saved more lives than swords in several disasters he remembered. Mara told him that was exactly the sort of sentence a man who owned no good sword would say. Selen touched one leaf with a fingertip. The tree responded with a tiny pulse of light. She jerked her hand back. No explosion followed. She seemed almost disappointed. The biggest change appeared in the nearest pool. The water did not become crystal clear. That would have been too easy. The oily rainbow film on the surface thinned. Some of the black threads suspended in it sank toward the roots. After 20 minutes, Liara took 3 samples. The unidentified mana toxin had fallen sharply within the root radius. Ordinary biological contamination remained. Mineral content remained. The water still needed boiling and basic filtration. After those steps, Liara believed a limited quantity could be made safe enough to drink. Kai felt the first genuine release of pressure since arriving. Then, Liara gave him the rate. At the sapling's current size, with the small pool and existing root mass, it could purify roughly 30 to 35 liters a day to the required level. That was enough for 4 adults under strict field conditions, including drinking, cooking, and basic wound cleaning. It left little room for growth, fever, heavy washing, or a larger population. For 4 people, they could manage. For a settlement, they could not. Kai accepted that. He treated the tree as infrastructure because its limits could be measured and planned around. At sunrise, he marked the first 18-meter root circle with stakes. The air inside it smelled slightly different, less sour. Insects still existed, but fewer clustered over the water. Several small plants that had been curled and blackened along the edges slowly lifted their leaves. Liara inspected them with the concentration of a jeweler appraising gems. Mara asked if she planned to name every weed. Liara said only the edible ones. Mara immediately became supportive of botanical scholarship. They ate breakfast and reviewed damage from the night. The crossbow stock had cracked when Kai jammed it between a hound's jaws. 19 bolts were still accounted for. One had been fired, recovered from the mud, and bent badly enough to discard. One canvas sheet had been torn by the hound that climbed the wall. Mara's shoulder wound was shallow but painful. Kai's ribs would make lifting difficult for at least a day. 2 hound carcasses lay on dry ground. A third floated against reeds below the mound. Liara wanted samples from plates and organs. Mara wanted the bodies burned. Kai did not want unknown contaminated tissue in a fire above gas pockets. They used hooked rope to pull the third carcass onto stone without anyone entering the water. After Liara finished taking small samples, the bodies went into an old stone-lined refuse chamber beside the collapsed shed, above the flood mark, and outside the current root circle. No carpenter had inspected the old chamber, so Kai and Liara tested the floor with water first, packed the visible joints with clay, covered the carcasses with ash and a layer of flat stone, and marked the chamber as contaminated. The sealed samples remained in Liara's control. The plates beneath the hound's fur were surprisingly hard and light. Mara tested one with the edge of her sword. It scratched, but did not split. Kai stored several intact pieces. He had no idea yet what they could become, but throwing away a strong local material would be foolish. Liara found something more important. The animals carried the same unidentified contamination as the water, only concentrated in glands near the spine. Their bodies had adapted rather than died from it. That suggested the toxin had existed in the mire for generations. Kai asked whether that made it natural. Liara looked toward the golden tree. Natural did not mean harmless, she said, but the distribution was strange. The concentration in the animals was too consistent. She would need more samples from different areas. Kai added it to the growing list of questions. By noon, the settlement had 1 clean water process, 1 partially repaired shelter, a glowing sapling, 2 injured people, 1 exhausted channeler, and exactly 0 renewable food sources. The charter window did not care about effort. Permanent settlement, incomplete. Potable water, provisional. Renewable food, incomplete. Frontier facility restored, incomplete. Territorial control, pending. Time remaining, 99 days. Kai closed it. The golden tree's root radius had increased by less than 1 meter since dawn. He tried feeding it water. Growth improved slightly. He tried burying cut reeds near the roots. The sapling absorbed some decomposing plant matter, slowly. He tried channeling his own mana into the trunk. Nothing happened. Apparently his class did not include a useful personal mana pool. Selin offered to try. Kai hesitated. She said if the tree exploded, at least they would learn something. Liara objected from 20 meters away. Kai asked Selin to begin with the smallest amount she could produce. She placed her palm against the bark. The golden veins brightened immediately. A ripple traveled down the trunk. Then every leaf stood rigid. Kai told her to stop. Selin stopped. A pulse of excess mana escaped her fingers and jumped into the ground. One of the stakes, marking the root boundary, launched itself into the air and landed in the mud 3 meters away. Mara looked at it. She said the perimeter had been breached. Selin told her to defend it. The golden tree did not appear damaged. Its root radius increased by half a meter over the next 10 minutes. Kai concluded that mana could accelerate growth, but Selin needed a way to regulate flow before they used her seriously. She did not argue. The uncontrolled stake had made the point. Late that morning, Kai and Mara inspected the western causeway for tracks from the surviving pack leader. The animal had retreated deeper north, not west toward the road. That meant it had not followed their route in. It lived nearby, Mara wanted to hunt it before it returned. Kai refused. They did not know the terrain, they were injured, and leaving the sapling unguarded to pursue one predator violated every priority he had. Mara disliked the decision. She did not challenge it further. That was progress from the night before. They found something else instead. Footprints. Human. Small and large prints, mixed together on a muddy patch beyond the causeway. Some were barefoot. The trail came from the northeast and passed within 60 meters of the watchpost, before turning into thicker reeds. The prints were fresh. Hours, not days. Kai crouched beside them. Mara said 20 or more people, moving badly, probably tired. Liara joined them and found a strip of cloth caught on a reed. Cheap gray wool. It smelled of smoke and sweat. Selin looked toward the thick reeds. She asked why people would enter the mire on foot. Mara answered before Kai could. Because whatever was behind them felt worse. Kai returned to camp and changed the watch plan. They did not follow immediately. 4 people should not disappear into high reeds chasing an unknown group while injured. Instead, they made their presence visible. Selin powered the signal lantern during daylight in short intervals. Kai raised a strip of white canvas on the old watch pole. Mara set bells made from scrap metal on the 2 easiest approaches. Liara prepared a clean water container separate from their personal supply. If the strangers were hostile, the camp was more defensible than the reeds. If they were desperate, they might come toward light and water. Less than an hour later, while the golden tree's leaves still held the hard brightness of midday, Kai heard whispering beyond the ruined wall. He reached for the repaired spear. Mara was already at the doorway. Beyond her, a child stood at the edge of the root circle. The boy was perhaps 8. Mud covered his legs to the knees. His hair had been hacked short with a knife. He clutched an empty wooden cup in both hands. Behind him, the reeds moved. Mara kept her sword low, but ready. Kai stepped into view. The boy stared at the golden tree, then at the pot of boiled water cooling near the fire. His lips were cracked. He asked whether the water was clean. Kai did not answer immediately. He looked at Liara. She nodded once. Kai filled the cup halfway. The boy drank too fast. Liara took it from him before he could finish and told him to wait. He tried to grab it back. She held it out of reach with the calm authority of someone who had fought thirsty patience before. More people emerged from the reeds. First a thin woman carrying a toddler. Then an old man with a fishing spear. Then 2 teenagers supporting a limping woman between them. Men, women, and children kept emerging until Mara counted 23 people in total. Kai counted the water. The arithmetic was ugly. The strangers stopped outside the root circle. They had noticed the claim stakes. That told Kai they understood frontier law. The old man with the fishing spear stepped forward as their spokesman. His name was Garrick Pell. Gray hairs stuck out around a weathered face, and his left eye was cloudy from an old injury. His right eye remained sharp enough to inspect Kai's brass claim seal before looking at the golden tree. Garrick asked whether Kai was a crown tax officer. Kai said he was the charter holder for the Black Mire. That answer made several people step backward. Mara noticed and shifted away from the doorway so she did not block their retreat. Good instinct. Kai asked where they had come from. Garrick said Greymouth. The name matched the village on the old map. Kai remembered the tax arrears note. He asked why 23 people from Greymouth were hiding inside a poison swamp. Garrick did not answer at first. A younger man behind him muttered that crown men always knew the answer before asking. Kai said he did not. The man laughed without humor. Garrick finally explained. Greymouth had missed 2 tax payments after a bad fishing season. The district reeve responded by seizing half the village boats as collateral. With fewer boats, the fishermen missed the next payment too. Last week, the reeve arrived with labor contracts. Families unable to pay were to provide workers for road construction farther north. The work camp had a reputation for people returning with broken lungs from quarry dust, if they returned at all. The road west was watched. The Black Mire was not. Derek's group planned to cross an old raised path through the wetland and reach another district. Two sections had collapsed into broad mud flats. The flats were too shallow for the reed skiffs and deep enough to swallow a person to the waist. The only open water route curved back toward roads watched by the Reeves men. The group could still move around the western mire, but they had lost the route north and spent 3 days searching for another crossing. Their clean water was gone. Kai asked what supplies they had. The younger man bristled. Garrick answered anyway. 2 small reed skiffs hidden nearby, one already leaking at a seam, 3 fishing nets, hand tools, 2 heavy bags of smoked fish, roughly 12 kilograms between them, a grain sack that Garrick estimated at 14 kilograms, blankets, 1 carpenter's chest, 2 large kettles, several bowls, a chipped brass signal horn, and a wrapped bundle of dry peat cakes Greymouth fishermen carried for wet weather cooking. Almost no clean water. Kai looked at Liara. She understood the question. With strict rationing, the Golden Tree could provide safe drinking water for perhaps 12 adults at current output. Children required less, but 27 total residents would still exceed production by more than double. Their stored clean water could cover the gap for part of a day. After that, someone went thirsty or drank contaminated water. Taking everyone in immediately would feel humane and could still kill them if the water failed. Kai asked Garrick whether anyone in the group was sick. 2 had diarrhea after drinking from a stagnant pool. 1 woman had a cut on her leg. The limping woman had twisted an ankle. No fever that they knew of. Liara began screening them one at a time before anyone entered the clean zone. She kept the 2 stomach cases in a separate shaded area, gave them their own clay waste vessel from the newcomers' cookware, and told everyone caring for them to wash with boiled water and ash, until she knew whether the cause was infection or toxin exposure. While she worked, Kai asked Garrick what skills the adults had. The old man looked offended. Kai explained why. He had cleanable water, but not enough. They had 23 people and knowledge of the local swamp. If everyone simply waited for him to solve the problem, they would be thirsty by evening. If they combined resources, the situation might be survivable. That changed the conversation. Garrick was a fisherman and knew the old channels. His daughter, Nessa, repaired nets and made reed matting. A broad man named Oren was a carpenter. 2 brothers trapped eels. 3 women knew which marsh plants Greymouth traditionally used for food and roof thatch. 1 teenager had worked with a village potter. Perrin, a lean 16-year-old with sandy brown hair, could handle a small boat better than any adult in the group. Kai looked over the group again with the new information in mind. The same 23 people who strained the water reserve also brought fishing knowledge, carpentry, boats, nets, cooking vessels, and hands that could keep a watch rotation. He offered terms. They could enter the settlement voluntarily. Nobody owed him permanent service. For the next several days, until food and water stabilized, everyone capable of work would take assigned shifts. Existing supplies would be pooled and recorded. Personal possessions remained personal. Anyone who wanted to leave once a safe route was found could leave. Garrick asked about the crown. Kai showed him the charter. Inside the claim, the district reeve had no authority to seize residents for external labor, while the frontier settlement remained legally active. Selin confirmed the clause. Again, too quickly. Garrick studied her, then Kai. He asked what tax Kai intended to charge. Kai said none until they had something worth taxing. Mara muttered that he was wasting a historic opportunity. Garrick's good eye narrowed. Kai said the settlement needed labor more than silver. They could argue about taxes after they had enough water to survive the argument. That earned the first reluctant smile from the old fisherman. The group accepted. The settlement registration did not require all 23 to bond immediately. Kai gave them the option, after explaining the legal meaning. 20 of the newcomers entered settlement status. Adult household heads signed for themselves and registered their minor dependents under the same household bond. 3 adults chose to remain temporary guests because they still planned to continue north if the route opened. Kai accepted that too. Settlement population: 24 registered residents. Temporary residents: 3. People on site: 27. The system inventoried the pooled food and produced warnings. The mostly untouched crown ration box, Garrick's smoked fish and grain, and the newcomers' smaller private food contributions came to 2.3 days at a strict emergency ration. Potable water coverage, 43%. Shelter capacity, 31%. Sanitation capacity, 19%. Kai looked at the last line, then at the temporary 4-person trench he had built on arrival. The new population had already outgrown it, and the golden tree's roots were expanding in that direction. He closed the trench with clay and ash, and staked a new sanitation area on a raised stone spur beside the western causeway, more than 35 meters from the sapling and above the normal flood mark. The new facilities would use shallow clay-lined collection trenches rather than deep pits that could reach saturated soil. Mara followed his gaze and pointed a warning finger at him. 10 minutes later, she was supervising the work. She informed the new residents that their lord's first great doctrine was apparently that civilization began with drainage and a covered hole in the ground. Garrick, who had seen disease move through flood camps, surprised her by agreeing. Mara looked betrayed. The camp changed faster in 6 hours than it had in the previous day. Oren the carpenter inspected the ruined watchpost and declared the upper floor unusable, but the lower structure repairable. He organized 3 people to salvage straight beams from a collapsed shed near the causeway. Nessa and the other reed workers cut and dried long marsh stalks from within sight of the mound, then wove them into thick panels for walls and sleeping platforms. Garrick took Kai, Mara, and 2 younger fishermen to inspect the closest water routes. Liara remained with the sick and wounded. Selin stayed near the golden tree because Kai wanted to test controlled mana feeding later. And because sending the unstable mage into a reed marsh full of flammable gas seemed like poor planning, she accused him of discriminating against people who accidentally launched architecture. Kai said he discriminated equally against all uncontrolled explosions. The survey map showed a shallow side channel north of the watchpost. In reality, vegetation had almost hidden it. Garrick pushed aside reeds with his spear and explained that the mire changed every season. Channels filled, new ones opened, maps became lies quickly. Kai asked how greymouth fishermen navigated it. By reading watercolor, insect movement, tree growth, and bird patterns. Kai folded the old survey and gave Garrick the lead. Within 15 minutes, Garrick stopped him from stepping onto a green mat that looked like grass and was actually floating vegetation over chest-deep water. Mara said the engineer had just been defeated by Lon. Kai thanked Garrick and walked around it. He had no interest in protecting his pride at the cost of drowning. They found the 2 hidden skiffs under cut reeds. Both were narrow, shallow boats made from marsh channels. One leaked slightly. Oren could repair it. More important, Garrick showed Kai a cluster of fish traps farther north. The fleeing villagers had set them the day before, but lacked safe water to wait for a catch. 3 traps contained silver-brown eels. Another held 2 broad-shelled marsh crabs. Mara looked at the crabs. One raised a claw. She told Kai this one was larger and might require the full army. Kai handed her the collection basket. She accused him of abusing military personnel. Nobody ate the catch yet. Back at dry ground, Liara cut open 1 eel and 1 crab with separate tools and tested muscle, gut, gills, and the dark organs near the spine. The eel carried the same mana toxin as the hounds, but most of it concentrated in the gut and a small gland beside the liver. Clean muscle tested low, after those organs were removed, soaked briefly in purified water, and boiled. The crab stored far more contamination in its flesh. Liara marked the crabs for study rather than dinner. Garrick accepted the result without argument. Greymouth families had always discarded eel organs, which explained why the old practice had kept people safer than anyone realized. With functioning nets, traps, and enough people to check them safely, Garrick believed the nearby channels could provide a significant amount of usable eel and small fish. It would stretch the dry stores while they learned which species were safe. The edible marsh plants were more complicated. Liara had to approve each one. By then, the 2 people isolated with diarrhea had gone several hours without fever and were improving after clean water and bland grain broth. Liara suspected intestinal irritation from contaminated water more than a spreading infection, but she kept them separated through the night and kept their cookware out of the common pile. That afternoon, the reed workers brought back 3 baskets of tubers they had eaten in Greymouth for years. Liara tested them and found low levels of the same mana contamination. The villagers had adapted by soaking and boiling them several times. Kai asked whether the golden tree's purified water could remove the toxin faster. Liara tested a small batch. It did. That gave them another food source. But every basket of tubers now competed with drinking, cooking, and wound cleaning for the same limited output. By mid-afternoon, he had a rough board hanging inside the watchpost. Water production, water use, food stores, people on watch, injuries, construction tasks. Nobody in the settlement was required to read the numbers, but everyone could see them. One of the fishermen asked why Kai wrote down how much water each cooking pot used. Kai said, because invisible shortages became visible disasters. Mara walked past with a shovel over one shoulder and said their lord had begun worshipping numbers. Kai said the numbers had never tried to bite him. Mara pointed toward the damaged crossbow. She said they had not yet had the opportunity. The first real disagreement among the new residents came over water allocation. Derek's group wanted to use enough purified water to soak the marsh tubers. Liara wanted the same water reserved for drinking and cleaning wounds. Oren wanted some for mixing clay to repair a section of wall. All 3 needs were reasonable. There was not enough water for all 3. Kai did not make the decision alone. He asked Liara for the minimum medical reserve. She gave him a number. He asked Garrick whether the tubers could be soaked first in contaminated water, then finished in purified water. Garrick said yes, though it would take longer. He asked Oren whether wall clay could use raw swamp water if no one handled it barehanded. Oren did not know. Liara tested a sample and said yes, because the toxin was dangerous through ingestion and prolonged skin exposure, not instant contact. They adjusted the process. The conflict disappeared because the resource was broken into functions instead of treated as one argument over who deserved it. Garrick watched Kai afterward. He said most district men would have simply announced a ration and punished anyone who complained. Kai said most district men probably had a well. Garrick laughed. The first shelter extension rose before evening. It was not pretty. Reed panels covered the missing roof. Salvaged beams supported a long awning against the surviving wall. Sleeping mats filled the dry interior. Families with children got the most protected spaces. Single adults slept under the awning or beneath the spare canvas. Mara inspected the defensive side and objected that the reed wall would not stop a knife. Oren replied that neither would rain, and rain was more likely that night. Mara asked whether he got served in the army. Oren said no, which was why he still believed roofs were useful. Then nodded once. Kai quietly added Oren to the short mental list of people who could speak to Mara without being intimidated. Selen's experiment with the golden tree began after the main construction ended. Kai used a brass cup, a length of salvaged iron wire, and the old railing section from the lantern test. None of it was designed for mana work. Selen made that very clear. She explained that proper channeling arrays used conductive crystal, etched silver, and insulation runes. Kai had mud, rust, and optimism. Kai corrected her. He had very little optimism. The goal was not to build a permanent regulator. It was to understand whether her uncontrolled leakage could be divided. Selen stood 2 meters from the sapling. One hand touched the tree through a strip of damp cloth. The other rested on the iron railing driven into wet soil outside the root circle. Kai asked her to let mana flow naturally rather than actively cast. For the first few seconds, nothing visible happened. Then gold light brightened beneath the bark. The railing began to vibrate. Selen breathed slowly. Her violet eyes stayed on the tree. The light remained steady. Kai watched the nearby root marker. 1 centimeter, 2, 3. Then Selen's concentration slipped when Mara, carrying a bucket behind her, stepped on a loose board and swore loudly. Mana surged. The railing jumped out of the ground. The brass cup shot sideways and struck Kai in the shoulder. The golden tree flared gold. Every person in camp turned. Selen released both hands immediately. The tree settled. Kai rubbed his shoulder. Mara looked at the fallen cup. She asked whether that counted as the numbers biting him. Kai said the evidence was becoming concerning. Selin covered her face with both hands. She expected anger. Kai could tell from the way her shoulders locked. Instead, he asked if she had felt the surge before it happened. She lowered her hands, a fraction of a second before. Could she estimate direction? Into both outputs, but more into the grounding rail. That was useful. Kai told her the experiment had proved the concept, and the equipment was inadequate. They would stop until they had better materials. Selin stared at him. She asked whether he was seriously calling the flying cup a success. Kai said it had shown them exactly where the improvised regulator failed. Mara announced that engineering was apparently the art of giving expensive names to accidents. Oren, working nearby, said carpentry used the same method. By evening, the settlement was exhausted. The rain arrived as a warm wall moving across the reeds. Garrick saw it first and shouted before the first drops reached the mound. Kai had less than a minute to make one choice that mattered to the water crisis. He ordered the unused canvas shelter spread as a catch sheet over the cleanest section of stone, while Nessa and 2 others scrubbed the newcomers' kettles with boiled water. The first runoff from the canvas went onto the ground. Liara wanted the dust, bird droppings, and anything the wind had deposited washed away before they collected a single cup. Then the storm hit hard enough to flatten the reeds. Water hammered the roof and poured from the canvas in sheets. Nessa caught it in kettles, bowls, cleaned grain jars, and every vessel they could spare. Liara tested the first direct rain sample under the awning. The mana toxin was present, probably carried by the Myers mist and airborne residue, but at less than 1/5 the concentration of surface water. The golden tree could finish processing it much faster than swamp water. Kai assigned 1 cleaned barrel to rain catch only. The opportunity lasted less than 10 minutes before the wind turned dangerous. A gust tore one corner of the canvas loose. The sheet filled like a sail, ripped a stake from the ground, and nearly dragged a kettle into the swamp. Perrin, the teenage boat handler, threw himself onto the line. Mara caught the next stake before it came free. Oren reached the flapping corner and shouted for someone to cut the tension before the canvas tore in half. Kai used the repair knife he had been carrying at his belt to slash one overloaded tie. The sheet collapsed onto the stone instead of sailing into the reeds. They lost part of the catch, but kept the canvas. The roof chose that moment to fail somewhere else. One old brace cracked above the section where 3 families had moved their sleeping mats. Oren heard the sound before anyone saw the beam shift. He shoved 2 children clear. Mara planted both hands under the sagging timber and held it while Oren jammed a fresh support into place. Kai started toward them, ribs protesting. Mara told him to stay where he could make irritating decisions. He ignored the insult and redirected 4 adults to clear the floor. Then had Selin power the signal lantern at low output so Oren could see the split grain in the timber. Selin kept the iron railing ground connected and held the light steady. The brace went in before Mara's curse marks had time to brighten. Outside, the old drainage ditch was filling faster than it could discharge. Garrick and 2 fishermen cleared reed clumps from the outlet with hooked poles. Kai stopped anyone from standing in the current. A blockage broke free with enough force to sweep a loose board off the mound. The water level dropped, but dirty runoff from the southern side had already crossed part of the golden tree's root zone. Amber toxin nodules near the truck swelled until several were larger than walnuts. Liara dragged Kai under the awning and showed him the change. The tree was handling more contamination than before, but it was storing the separated waste rather than destroying it. If the nodules filled, nobody knew whether purification would slow, stop, or push concentrated toxin somewhere else. She believed she could remove them, but she wanted daylight, glass tools, and containers that would survive contact. Selin, within hearing distance, objected to the suggestion that fragile containers and her presence belonged in the same thought. Nobody had mentioned her. Mara said that was what made it accurate. The storm lasted a little under 2 hours. When it finally moved east, everyone was wet. The roof held, the drainage ditch still functioned, and the catch barrel contained 29 liters of rainwater, after the rejected first flush. Liara marked it as low-toxin raw water. It still needed golden tree processing, filtration, and boiling. The amount bought them time. It did not create a permanent source, and another storm could arrive next week instead of tomorrow. They also discovered a fuel problem before sleep. Wet reed burned badly, and boiling water for 27 people consumed more heat than Kai's original 4-person plan. Garrick's dry peat cakes became communal fuel. Oren built a simple enclosed clay stove under the awning to waste less heat, while clean reeds and tested wood were stacked above the floor to dry for later. 2 of the newcomers' kettles went into continuous water duty. The settlement now had a way to process more water, but every liter still required labor and fuel. At dawn, the board inside the watch post showed one encouraging number: food reserve at current ration, 3.1 days. The eel traps and cleaned tubers had bought time. Water remained the limiting factor. Kai woke to an argument over the name of the settlement. He had not realized the settlement needed a name that morning. The system had other ideas. Permanent settlement condition progress. Registration incomplete. Settlement designation required. Kai found 27 people gathered around the claim board with the seriousness of diplomats negotiating a treaty. Mara favored Red Bastion. Liara said there was nothing red about the place except Mara. Mara suggested Golden Bastion instead. Selin objected that naming a settlement after a sapling they did not understand was legally reckless and aesthetically desperate. Her own proposal was Western Mire Restoration Post 1. Silence followed. Mara told her that if an enemy saw that name on a map, he would surrender out of exhaustion before reaching them. Oren suggested New Greymouth. Several refugees disliked naming their future after a village they had been forced to leave. Kai considered Blackwater, but Liara pointed out that Blackwater was precisely what they were trying not to drink. The debate continued while people ate breakfast. Garrick arrived late from checking fish traps. He pulled off one boot, tipped a stream of swamp water onto the ground, and listened to the argument for perhaps 20 seconds. Then he looked at the stone mound beneath them. He said his family had spent 3 nights sleeping in reeds, where every step sank to the ankle. As far as he was concerned, the best thing about this place was that his boots stayed dry. Nessa laughed. Someone repeated dry ground. Another person liked it. Within 2 minutes, half the camp was calling the settlement Drow Ground. Kai objected that a future trade map could not seriously contain a capital named Dry Ground. Mara asked whether he already had plans for a capital. Kai said that was not the point. Selin informed him that Western Mire Restoration Post 1 remained available. The settlement required a designation before the end of the first 72 hours to qualify as permanent. Settlement designation, Dry Ground. Registration accepted. The system flashed. Permanent settlement condition, provisionally satisfied. A cheer rose from the refugees. The old fisherman appeared entirely too pleased with himself. Mara clapped Kai on the shoulder, carefully avoiding his injured ribs, and congratulated Lord Dryground. Kai told her that title did not exist. She said it did now. The morning work began. The golden tree had grown another 30 centimeters overnight. Its trunk was thicker. Root radius had reached 23 meters. Kai expected the roots to spread outward evenly. They did not. Most extended toward the nearest water and organic material, which made sense. One root behaved differently. It had grown from the eastern side of the trunk, crossed beneath the ruin, and turned almost straight downward. Kai noticed because a narrow line of soil had lifted between 2 old foundation stones. He traced it with a wooden probe. The root descended beyond the length of his arm. Garrick crouched beside him. The old man said there used to be more stone beneath this mound. His father had mentioned old works, though nobody in Greymouth knew their purpose. Kai asked how old. Garrick shrugged. Older than him. Older than his father, probably. The 28-year-old survey marked only the watchpost. No underground structure. Kai did not dig immediately. Water was still the priority. He spent the first half of the morning expanding purification capacity in ways that did not depend on tree growth. Orin built 2 raised settling barrels from old storage tubs found in the ruin. Raw swamp water went into the first barrel, where heavy sediment settled. It passed through layers of reed fiber, sand, charcoal made from clean dry wood, then into a second barrel. That did not remove the manatoxin, but it reduced the sediment and biological load before water entered the golden tree's root pool. Liara tested output every hour. With the settling barrels and fresh root growth, finished safe water rose from roughly 33 liters a day to between 38 and 40. Kai wrote 3 different demand numbers instead of hiding everything behind one ration. A normal, sustainable target for 27 mixed adults and children doing hard work was about 72 liters a day for drinking, cooking, and minimal wound care. A strict short-term ration reduced that to roughly 54. Their true emergency floor was 43, and even that assumed no major fever, heavy labor, or new injuries. The tree could almost meet the emergency floor now. The rain catch and stored road water covered the daily gap for a little while. It also meant one sick child or one damaged barrel could erase their margin. Dry ground could survive for another day or two. It still could not grow on those numbers. Kai wrote the numbers on the board. Nobody joked when they saw them. The old pumping station. Kai looked up. Garrick explained that his father had told stories about a crown station east of the old watch post, before Greymouth existed in its current location. Royal workers maintained channels in the mire. The station moved water through stone gates. Then, something happened. Workers left. The routes became dangerous. The adults of Garrick's childhood treated the place as somewhere children were forbidden to explore. Kai unfolded the old survey. The pumping station symbol sat roughly 3 kilometers east, crossed out in red. He asked why Garrick had not mentioned it sooner. Garrick said that until that morning, he had assumed the station was a story old men used to keep children close to home. Then, he tapped the map. The story apparently had a government symbol. He knew the beginning of one old channel leading east, but he had not followed it in 15 years. Mara wanted to scout immediately. Kai looked at the sky, the state of their injured group, and the water board. He said, tomorrow morning. They needed the rest of today to stabilize dry ground, prepare a small exploration team, and make sure the settlement could function if they were gone for several hours. Mara did not like waiting. This time she did not argue, because the reasons were visible around them. If there really was old crown infrastructure beneath the mound, understanding it might tell them whether the eastern pumping station was connected. He chose 4 workers and began excavating carefully along the side of the lifted foundation stone. Orin took over after 5 minutes because Kai's method offended him. Kai had been using the mattock too close to the root. Orin said if their magical tree was the only thing cleaning water, perhaps they should avoid chopping through it while looking for interesting rocks. Kai handed him the tool. Mara, passing with a bundle of spear shafts, observed that his authority was collapsing rapidly. Kai said, "Good. Competent disagreement was cheaper than rebuilding the stakes." Orin grunted approval. The excavation revealed dressed stone half a meter below the old foundation, fitted too precisely to belong to the watchpost. The blocks were darker and fitted with much greater precision. Garrick did not recognize the masonry. Selin did. Kai saw it before she spoke. She had come over carrying a bucket and stopped so abruptly that water sloshed onto her boots. Her violet eyes fixed on the exposed stone. She knew something. Kai asked if she had seen construction like it before. Selin answered after a moment. Old royal utility work, perhaps. Her voice was controlled again. Kai asked what made her think that. The joint shape, she said. Certain crown facilities used interlocking blocks to resist magical pressure. Academy Civic Studies again. This time, Mara looked at her too. Selin noticed. She added that the Academy taught channelers to recognize infrastructure they were forbidden to damage. Given her history with fountains and walls, Mara said the lesson had clearly come late. Selin told her it had been very theoretical. The joke broke the tension, but it did not erase the question. Kai let it go. They dug deeper. At 1 meter, Orin's mattock struck metal. The sound was wrong for a buried pipe, too broad. They cleared soil by hand and with wooden scrapers. A flat dark plate emerged beneath the stone. Its surface had resisted corrosion almost perfectly. Fine channels ran across it in geometric patterns filled with dull blue material. The golden tree's root rested directly against the edge. Kai cleaned another section. A crest appeared. Crown and 3 stars. The emblem of House Solvar, the royal dynasty. Everyone around the pit went quiet. Garrick was the first to say what all of them were thinking. The Black Mire was supposed to have been abandoned before the current frontier records began. Why was a royal pressure structure buried beneath an ordinary watchpost? Kai looked at the 28-year-old survey. It showed no underground facility and no pressure structure. Selen's face had gone pale, and her attention stayed fixed on details the villagers did not understand. Kai asked what the blue channels were. She crouched at the edge of the pit, but did not touch them. Mana conductors, probably. Very old. High capacity. How high? She glanced at the width of the channels. Far more than a watchpost would ever need. Kai looked toward the golden tree. The strange root had not wandered randomly downward. It had found this plate. A line of symbols ran along one edge, partly hidden under stone. Selen translated the first surviving section, asset control. The next word had been scratched away or damaged. Another fragment remained farther down, suppress. The rest disappeared beneath the foundation. Mara asked if that was supposed to say suppression. Selen said, maybe. Kai noticed her right hand. It was trembling. She tucked it into her sleeve. He remembered the royal officer in the registry. The spark when Selen touched the claim seal. Her knowledge of legal clauses. Her reaction to the masonry, pressure lines. He still did not know what structure they formed. Before he could ask another question, the golden tree pulsed. Gold light traveled down the root into the buried plate. The dull blue channels flickered. Everyone stepped back. Selen told them not to touch anything. A vibration passed through the ground. At first, Kai thought the plate contained some ancient machines spinning to life. Then the vibration stopped. 3 seconds passed. A low impact sounded from somewhere far below them. The sound was quiet enough to miss in conversation, but so deep that Kai felt it through the soles of his boots. The soles of Kai's boots felt it more than his ears heard it. Boom. The water in a nearby bucket rippled. Nobody moved. 5 seconds. Another impact. Mara's hand settled on her sword. Orin backed away from the pit. Garrick whispered that machines did not usually sound like that. Kai counted the intervals. 5.8 seconds. 6. 5.9. The rhythm repeated 5 times, and then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence afterward made everyone listen harder. Whatever had answered the golden tree was regular enough to resemble a pulse, and large enough for Kai to feel through stone. The golden tree's root brightened once more. A system window opened in Kai's vision. New environmental structure detected. Analysis incomplete. Then, one line appeared beneath it. Suppression circuit integrity, 92%. Kai stared at the number. He did not know what was being suppressed. He did not know whether 92% was good. He did know one thing. The royal family had buried a massive magical structure beneath the Black Mire, erased it from the current survey, and then handed the land to an F-rank class that had immediately grown a route toward it. Crown Prince Adrian's stillness in the Hall of Founders returned to him with perfect clarity. The evidence did not prove the prince had planned the assignment, but Kai stopped treating the choice of territory as a joke. Liara arrived from the medical shelter at a run after hearing the underground impacts. Kai explained what they had found. She crouched near the plate, studied the route, then asked how much water the settlement had left. The storm catch had given them 29 liters of low-toxin raw water, which was the reason the reserve had not already failed. After the golden tree processed that water, and the settlement paid its daily deficit, however, the margin was shrinking again. At current consumption, finished safe water would fall below the emergency reserve by the following evening, unless output increased or another source was found. The underground mystery could wait. Thirst could not. Kai stood, and ordered the excavation covered with a temporary timber frame so nobody fell in and no child touched the plate. Orin would build a proper barrier. Selen was not to connect mana to it. The golden tree root would remain untouched because cutting an unknown magical connection was the sort of decision that should follow understanding rather than curiosity. Mara asked whether the heartbeat concerned him. Kai said, very much. She asked why he was leaving it alone. Because whatever was down there had apparently been there longer than any of them, and their immediate problem had a deadline measured in hours. Garrick nodded toward the east, the pumping station. Kai spread the survey on the old table inside the watchpost. People gathered around. The old station sat beside a drainage canal marked Channel 4. The channel's western branch passed close to dry ground before disappearing under later flood markings. The newly exposed royal plate aligned with the same east-west axis. That might be coincidence. Kai did not like the odds. Garrick traced a route with one thick finger. The old surface path was gone for at least half the distance. A narrow marsh channel could take the skiffs east. Then they would need to cross a series of raised islands on foot. He had not traveled beyond the second island in 15 years. Mara asked about predators. Garrick said, yes. Selen asked, what kind? Garrick said the kind he had survived, by not investigating. Kai chose the expedition team. Himself, because the station was infrastructure, and the charter holder needed to assess it. Liara, because unknown water and contamination made her essential. Mara, because the route was dangerous. Selen, because the station almost certainly contained magical equipment. Garrick, because maps did not know the mire as well as he did. That left 22 people at dry ground. Orin would coordinate construction. Nessa would control water distribution. 2 fishermen with the best remaining spears would manage watch rotations. The signal lantern would stay at camp, which meant Selen could not rely on it as a mana sink during the expedition. Kai and Selen spent the rest of the afternoon building the simplest substitute they could manage. They used a heavy iron bar from the ruined tower, wrapped one end with wet reed fiber, and attached a short chain scavenged from the old stove. Selen tested it away from the golden tree. A small mana pulse entered the bar. The metal warmed. A larger pulse made it hum. The third pulse jumped from the chain into the wet ground and produced a puff of steam. It was crude and dangerous, but if she had to cast, the bar might give excess mana somewhere to go. Mara looked at the meter-long iron rod. She asked whether Selen was now expected to carry her own lightning attractor through a swamp. Selen said she preferred staff. Mara called it a rod. Selen said staff. Garrick walked past and called it a very expensive stick. Selen looked wounded. Kai sided with staff because morale mattered. Mara accused him of political cowardice. The argument lasted through dinner. That evening, the first proper meal at dry ground was eel stew thickened with cleaned marsh tubers and the last of their dried onions. It tasted better than it had any right to. People sat beneath the repaired awning while rainwater dripped from the edges. Children argued over pieces of fish. Orin explained how he planned to reinforce the roof. Nessa showed Liara a local reed used for stomach pain. Mara inspected 3 new spear shafts and pretended not to be listening when a boy asked whether she had really killed 4 swamp wolves alone. She corrected him. 3 hounds, she said. Kai had nearly been eaten by the 4th. Kai, eating across the fire, pointed out that her arithmetic had just improved his contribution to the fight significantly. The boy asked if Kai was strong too. Mara looked at Kai's bandaged ribs. She said he was extremely dangerous to drainage systems. Several adults laughed. Kai accepted his reputation. It was the first time the settlement sounded like people living somewhere rather than people waiting to leave. Then a second series of impacts began beneath the ground. The first boom stopped every conversation under the awning. 5 or 6 seconds later came another. The golden tree's leaves trembled, although there was no wind. After 4 beats, the vibration faded again. Kai looked toward the covered excavation. The system window flickered at the edge of his vision. Suppression circuit integrity, 92%. The number had not changed. He told the children it was probably old machinery shifting under the ground. Garrick's good eye met his over the fire. Neither man believed that explanation. After dinner, Kai walked the root circle with Liara. She had removed 2 toxin nodules from the trunk, using a glass blade, and stored them in sealed clay jars lined with ash. The golden tree tolerated the procedure, and its purification rate improved slightly afterward. The pattern was clear now. The tree separated contamination into storage nodules, while people still had to remove and isolate the waste safely. Liara said she liked that. Kai asked why. Because a power with visible waste was easier to trust than one that made poison vanish, she said. When things disappeared completely, people stopped asking where they went. Kai understood the sentiment. He asked whether she had seen anything in the hound samples resembling the blue material in the royal plate. Liara said no direct match, but the magical toxin in the hounds carried a metallic signature she still could not identify. Better tools might tell them more. The pumping station might have an old laboratory, or records, or nothing useful at all. Kai preferred the first 2 possibilities. They reached the eastern edge of the root circle. The golden tree's downward root passed beneath them. Liara asked whether he thought the prince knew about the plate. Kai said he did not have enough evidence. She gave him a sideways look. That was not the same as no. Kai admitted it. The prince's reaction to his class had been wrong for a man hearing an unfamiliar F-rank title. The royal approval on Selen's transfer had been faster than routine bureaucracy. The map omitted a structure bearing the royal crest. Any one of those facts could have an innocent explanation. Together, they justified caution. Liara asked what he planned to do if the crown had intentionally sent him here for something. Kai looked at the small, glowing tree. Survive long enough to learn what. That was all he could responsibly promise. On the other side of the camp, Mara was teaching 3 adults how to stand with spears without tangling their feet. She moved slowly because of the wound in her arm, correcting grips and spacing. The dark red curse marks remained faint. Selen sat on a broken stone block and cleaned the iron staff with an expression of deep personal resentment toward Rust. Orin hammered a roof brace into place. 27 people depended on a water system that could support 12. Kai had inherited a magical class, but the most important thing he possessed at that moment was a list of people who knew things he did not. Before anyone could settle for the night, Nessa came looking for Kai. She did not call him Lord. Most of the Greymouth people did not, and Kai preferred it that way. She carried the water ledger in one hand and a covered clay jug in the other. The jug was lighter than the number written on the board said it should be. Kai checked the marks. At sunset, the medical reserve had held 6 liters. After the evening meal and 1 wound cleaning, it should still have held 5.5. The jug held about 4.5. 1 liter was missing. A single liter would not destroy dry ground, but an unrecorded liter made every later calculation unreliable. Mara found the answer behind the reed shelter. A man named Tovin Grell was kneeling beside his 6-year-old daughter with a cup in his hand. The girl, Mina, had been one of the children who spent 3 days trapped in the mire. Her cheeks were flushed and her breathing was quick. An open 1-liter water skin lay beside Tovin's knee, still more than half full. Mara's voice carried across the camp before Kai reached them. She asked where the water had come from. Tovin stood too fast and placed himself between Mara and the child. People noticed. Within a minute, half the settlement was watching. Tovin admitted he had taken it from the reserve. He did not apologize first. He said Mina had vomited twice after dinner and could not keep the normal ration down. He had asked Nessa for more. Nessa had told him the medical reserve required Liara's approval. Liara had been across the camp dealing with a wound. Tovin had waited. Mina became weaker, and then he took the jug. Nessa said she had told him she would find Liara. Tovin said his daughter was not a number on Kai's board. Several refugees murmured agreement. Others looked angry with him. They had children too, and they had followed the ration because they believed everyone else was following it. Garrick pushed through the crowd, but did not intervene. Mara watched Kai instead of Tovin. Kai crouched beside Mina. Liara arrived seconds later and moved everyone back. She checked the girl's eyes, pulse, skin, and mouth. Then she asked exactly how much water Mina had drunk since morning, and how often she had vomited. Tovin's answer made Liara's expression tighten. Mina was dehydrated. The standard ration had been calculated for healthy people, while vomiting had pushed the child outside that assumption. Liara used the salt and glucose powder from the medical chest to mix a rehydration drink and began giving it in measured mouthfuls. Nessa poured the unused water from Tovin's skin back into a marked vessel after Liara checked that the mouth of the skin had stayed clean. Kai looked at the board. His total water calculations still worked for healthy residents, but the procedure around the medical reserve did not. Access depended on one healer being physically present. When Liara was across camp, the rule gave Nessa no authority to respond to a problem she could already see. Tovin had broken the rule. The rule had also failed Tovin before he broke it. Mara asked quietly whether Kai wanted her to remove him from the supply area. Kai said no. A woman from Greymouth objected. If there was no consequence, she said, tomorrow everyone would take what they wanted and explain afterward. A second man said Tovin had taken water for a sick child, not for himself. Someone else answered that every family could produce a reason once supplies became tight. The argument spread. Kai stood. He did not ask them to be quiet. He waited until Garrick slammed the butt of his fishing spear once against the stone. The sound did the job. Kai explained what Liara had found. Mina required additional water. The current ration process had not provided a fast way to authorize that need. That part would change immediately. Tovin still should not have taken from a sealed reserve without telling anyone. If the jug had simply been found empty later, Nessa would have planned the next day around water that did not exist. Tovin's jaw tightened. He said he would do the same thing again if Mina were dying. Kai believed him. He said that was exactly why a settlement system had to give him a better option than choosing between his child and everyone else. The answer quieted some of the anger. Kai asked Liara how many people could identify severe dehydration well enough to authorize temporary extra water until she arrived. Liara pointed to Nessa and Garrick. Both had enough practical experience if she gave them clear signs to watch for. Kai added them as emergency medical ration contacts. Next, the reserve would be split into 2 containers. One remained general emergency water. One became medical reserve. Liara, Nessa, or Garrick could authorize use from the medical jug, and every use would be marked immediately on the board. Tovin asked what happened to him. Kai considered assigning a punishment for the theft. Punishing a father for correctly identifying that his child needed more water would teach the wrong lesson. Ignoring the missing water would teach another wrong lesson. So Tovin would take the first morning shift, carrying raw water to the settling barrels, and help Nessa measure every container. He would replace the labor his decision had imposed on the people managing the reserve, and he would learn exactly how narrow the margin was. Mara asked if that was punishment. Kai said it was restitution. Mara considered the word. She suggested adding 1 sanitation ditch for educational value. Tovin almost smiled despite himself. Kai said 1 ditch, provided his daughter was stable by morning. Liara looked up from Mina. She said the girl would probably be fine if she kept the fluid down. The crowd loosened. People returned to their shelters in small groups, still discussing the decision. Garrick remained. He told Kai that some would think he had been too soft. Kai said some probably thought he was too strict. Garrick agreed. Kai asked what Garrick thought. The old fisherman looked toward the board. He said he thought 27 thirsty people could destroy a settlement faster than 1 swamp hound if they stopped trusting the marks on that board. That was the real issue. Kai changed one more thing before night watch. Every morning and evening, water and food totals would be counted in front of at least 3 residents from different households. Anyone could inspect the ledger. Medical details remained private, but reserve quantities did not. On Earth, he had seen disaster shelters turn ugly because supplies appeared to vanish behind closed doors. People tolerated scarcity better than uncertainty about whether someone else was secretly receiving more. Transparency did not create water. It made the remaining water easier to manage together. Selin had watched the entire argument from the edge of the light. When people dispersed, she approached the board and traced one of the chalk numbers with her eyes. She said the charter gave Kai authority to impose ration violations as theft from the claim holder. Selin asked why he had not used it. Because the water did not belong to him in any useful sense, Kai said. If he drank the entire reserve himself, the charter might call it legal, and everyone would still die. Selin looked at him strangely. She said that was not how most landholders interpreted claim property. Kai asked how many of those landholders started with a poisoned swamp and 27 people sharing one jug. She conceded the point. A teenage boy named Perrin, who had been listening from a sleeping mat nearby, suddenly asked Selin whether she was a noble. The boy had noticed what Kai had noticed. Her speech, her manners, the way she knew laws that ordinary academy students probably ignored. Selin said she was an expelled channeler, wearing a state debt coat, which was not a particularly noble uniform. Perrin persisted. His mother had once worked in a manor. Selin held cups like the noble daughters there. Mara, passing behind him, said Selin also launched carriages like a noble daughter with a siege engine. The boy's attention shifted instantly. He demanded the story. Selin gave Mara a look of pure betrayal. Within 5 minutes, 6 children had gathered around her asking how far the carriage flew. Selin insisted it had not flown. It had undergone an uncontrolled lateral relocation. Kai heard Mara whisper to Liara that engineering terminology was spreading. Liara said they needed a quarantine. For the next 10 minutes, Selin defended herself against increasingly impossible versions of the fountain incident. In one retelling, the carriage crossed the entire academy. In another, it landed on the dean. By the time a small boy asked whether there had been a horse inside, Selin buried her face in both hands and said the horse had been in a different stable in another district and had still probably complained. One of the Greymouth women, who had been watching Selin with open suspicion since arrival, handed her a second bowl of stew and asked whether academy fountains were usually armed. Selin stared at the bowl, then accepted it. By the end of the meal, the children had stopped treating her like a crown official and started treating her like the mage who had lost a war against landscaping. Kai did not miss the relief in her shoulders when the children finally wandered away. He also did not miss the fact that she had never actually answered Perrin's question. Later, Mara found Kai near the claim marker, checking expedition supplies for the 3rd time. She asked if he intended to sleep at all. Kai said eventually. Mara leaned against the old wall. The curse marks on her arms were dark again, almost invisible in the low light. She wanted to change the expedition team. Kai looked up. Mara thought both she and Liara leaving dry ground at once was risky. The settlement would retain no trained fighter and no licensed healer. That was a real problem. Kai had considered it and found no perfect answer. The pumping station route required Mara, because the surviving hound pack and unknown wildlife made combat likely. It required Liara, because they were specifically investigating water in a contaminated region. It required Selin, because the station was magical. Her unexplained connection to royal devices made that choice more dangerous, not less. So Kai set rules before departure. Selin would not connect Mana to any crown mechanism until she had described it to the group. Mara would stay within arm's reach during any test. If Selin felt the same involuntary reaction she had shown at the claim seal or buried plate, she would say so immediately and step away. Selin disliked being treated like a possible fault in a machine. Kai told her he was treating the machine as a possible fault in Selin. She admitted that was harder to argue with. Garrick was still necessary because he knew the route, and Kai needed to assess the machinery and make the charter decision. Every essential skill belonged to one person. Their team had no redundancy yet. Mara suggested leaving her behind and taking 2 fishermen as guards. Kai asked whether either fisherman could reliably stop a hound pack. Mara admitted neither could. Kai then suggested leaving Liara and relying on written test instructions. Mara said that sounded even worse, which was his point. Kai had already asked Liara to train Nessa on the basic water tests and emergency treatment that evening. The fixed boundary claim marker would remain in place. Kai would carry the portable claim seal because the charter holder might need it at a royal facility, while Oren received written authority as camp coordinator for construction and ration decisions. He could not change charter settings or register new residents. 2 adults would stay on permanent watch. If an attack came, the settlement would retreat into the stone post and use Garrick's brass signal horn rather than fight outside. It was still risk. Mara frowned toward the shelters. She said she disliked leaving civilians with instructions instead of a soldier. Kai said so did he. That was why they needed the station quickly. If dry ground survived long enough to grow, Mara's next job after immediate defense would be training residents who could handle common threats without her. Mara asked if he had just assigned her more work. Kai said yes. Then she told him to put it on the board so the numbers could bite her too. Kai did. Defense training, lead, Mara. She stared at the line. For a moment, something complicated moved across her face. The army had removed responsibility from her after Fort Neril. Kai had returned a piece of it, after knowing exactly why it had been removed. Mara did not thank him. She tapped the board and said his handwriting was terrible. That was enough. He slept for 4 hours before taking the middle watch. Near midnight, the surviving pack leader appeared once at the edge of the reeds. Its yellow eyes reflected the golden tree's light. Mara reached for her sword. Kai raised the crossbow, now repaired with a rough new stock Oren had fitted. The hound did not approach. It watched the settlement for perhaps a minute, then disappeared into the reeds. Mara wanted to know if that counted as a threat. Kai said it counted as information. The animal had learned the edge of their light, the shape of their wall, and the fact that it had survived them once. Dry ground would need to learn faster. After the hound left, Kai finished the expedition check under the lantern. Garrick staged rope, food, the repair kit, and empty containers beside the 2 skiffs. Liara packed sample jars and medical supplies. Mara chose a short spear in addition to her sword, after Garrick warned that swinging a long blade from a Narum boat was a reliable way to join the swamp. Selin tied the improvised iron staff across her back and complained that nobody with a proper magical education had ever designed equipment this ugly. Kai asked whether proper magical education had kept a professor's carriage out of a fountain. Selin said she was beginning to regret telling anyone about that. Mara informed her that regret had arrived several days too late. Kai checked the waterboard one final time. Emergency demand was 43 liters a day. The Golden Tree and settling system were producing between 38 and 40. 11 liters of finished reserve remained, with another small batch still processing. Under strict use, dry ground could keep 27 people above the emergency floor until the following evening. A fever cluster, broken barrel, or drop in tree output would shorten that window. If the eastern station could move cleaner water, restore an old well, or increase flow through the Golden Tree's roots, they had a future. If it could not, Kai would have to reduce the settlement population before people began making desperate choices. Channel 4 ran east from beneath dry ground. The buried royal plate pointed the same way. The Golden Tree's deepest root pointed the same way. All 3 clues converged on one crossed-out symbol: Pumping Station 4. Behind him, the Golden Tree pulsed softly. The eastern root had lengthened several centimeters since dusk, and now pressed against another section of the buried conductor plate. A system notice appeared for less than a second. Suppression circuit integrity, 92%. A second line flickered beneath it. External node detected. Location unresolved. The root had finally reached enough of the old circuit to receive an answer from somewhere else in the network. Kai folded the survey and looked toward the eastern channel. Fog lay low over the reeds, hiding the first bend. Somewhere beyond it stood a station the Crown had abandoned, erased, or hidden. The skiffs were loaded. At first light, they would push into that fog and find out which word belonged on the map.